Hey, Chris, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I am well, Richard. Good to see you.
Likewise, likewise. Please introduce yourself, your name, your role, and your path to education.
My name is Chris Finn. I have been an educator for the past 27 years. I come from a family of educators. Father was a former principal who went on to work in the district office in the Bronx. Mother was a homemaker for many years, who then got her master's and went on to be a special ed teacher for many years. Sister is a school principal. My other sister is a social work educator. My wife is an educator, and we are the education tribe over here. I am from Teaneck, New Jersey, and frankly, when I reflect on my own upbringing, I had a very privileged upbringing compared to many of the students I've served over the years. I started teaching in the South Bronx in the 90s. I taught there for 8 years. I was then a founding teacher of a school in Harlem called Promise Academy,
Mhm.
working with a gentleman named Jeffrey Canada, spent a good deal of time there, served as a teacher and then a dean of students. Was then recruited with my executive director by the then mayor of Newark, Cory Booker, to take over a charter school in New Jersey called Lady Liberty Academy Charter School. I joined there and served for a year as the headmaster of school culture and climate, very schmancy title there. And then I went on to serve as the principal there for 5 more years. I was then recruited by a company called Cambridge Education to serve as an education consultant, work with schools, districts, organizations around the country, and did that for another 6 years. As a result of the pandemic, the Cambridge Education was closing their offices in the United States, told us at the top of 2021 that we would have until June to do this work. My wife and I had very thoughtfully created an LLC in 2019 with the idea that one day we'll pursue our own education consulting company. But this experience with Cambridge pushed me out of the nest, if you will.
Right.
And since July 1st, 2021, I'm a co-owner and lead consultant for my own education consulting company called Freedom Inc. Freedom INK, actually, the ink in which you write like we're writing ourselves into freedom.
Right.
And I heard about the Leverage Collective. A colleague of mine, Brett Rower, recommended me. And thus far, I've been pleased with the connections I've made thus far and the few meetings I've attended so far.
Yeah. Well, we're very happy to have you, and thank you for sharing your amazing journey and story and your path to now being the lead consultant there at Freedom Inc. And I appreciate the
Yes,
background as to why the spelling is what it is.
yes,
So when you're thinking about career changing or making shifts in one's career, some folks, of course, it's a very thoughtful plan where they've planned out all the steps and it goes exactly the plan. And others, they find themselves in a situation where, like as you said, it kind of pushes you out of one's nest. And so, what
yes.
strategies would you recommend others looking to make, or for others who are maybe looking to make similar shifts in their career?
It's a dynamic question, and the broad stroke response is, it's unique to each individual, right? I've been blessed in that I've had this kind of stair step career trajectory, teacher to founding teacher to dean to headmaster to principal to consultant, and then now I feel really skilled in the area, confident in the work that I do.
Sure.
I've learned throughout that process that I too have this desire to be challenged maybe, and in my career it looks like it happens every 6 to 8 years. I was 8 years here, 6 years here, 6 years here, 7 years here, and it's been that trajectory, and now I'm 2 years into this new gig.
Yeah.
So one, I would suggest that I've met many people who are not in that I want to be challenged realm. Many of the colleagues I know, older educators or more veteran educators, let's say, they are very much looking to kind of ride this out into the sunset. They want to get to a place that's very comfortable. They do
Mhm.
not want to be challenged. They do not want the stresses that they once experienced, and they're looking for kind of a smoother exit strategy, if you will, into retirement and beyond. So I'd say first, it requires you really have that lens as to where you want to go and which way you want to head. I would then factor this in, and I do this with my own daughters. And I'm famous for doing a lot of SEO work, and I'm big into emotional intelligence and these different things. And it sounds oftentimes like pie in the sky, but I would really suggest examining what brings you joy. What are
Mm.
the things that bring you some kind of respite, make you feel like you're moving the needle, or you're feeding those needs that you have, and allowing that to serve as your guide in that decision making. We all have, many of us have money to we need money to feed our kids. Our kids need this stuff called food, and they need it pretty much like every day, and we have to
All the time
provide
today.
that, right? So we're often driven by that piece. But I love when people have the wherewithal to really invest in their passion, into what drives them, into what feeds them, and allow that to serve as your North Star, if you will.
Absolutely. And when you are supporting and consulting and developing, right, educators and folks adjacent to educating young minds, what sort of approaches or techniques do you take and have found to be most effective in creating transformational outcomes, right? When someone comes to you, says, Chris, I'd love to engage with you to help me solve X problem. How do you typically approach that work?
Great, another great one. I would suggest that I learned this from having worked with Cambridge Education. When I say Cambridge Education, educators often kind of shrill up a little bit because Cambridge is famous for having brought the school quality review to the United States, which many states use. It's when your school is being observed and your school is being evaluated. So not everyone is in love with it. But what I did love about Cambridge Education is they don't sell like a boxed program, in that if you read these 3 books 2 times a day, or if your kids are on this program 7 hours a week, their academic scores will go up. It's not a boxed program or a template for success. I learned from them that they work with clients, and now I've carried this into my work. I work with clients and partners to make my support very much bespoke to each client, right? I've worked with schools, frankly, Richard, that are on the same street, right, but need vastly different things to be successful. And similarly with human beings, organizations, schools, school districts, etc. So my approach is that I do, in essence, like a discovery phase. I work with the client to glean what are some of the issues that they're challenged with, where they're headed, what are some of their goals, and their the things that they tentatively want to achieve. And then I see how I can use my skills, knowledge, expertise, partnerships, resources to help them meet those goals. And it's been very different. I do a lot of DEI work, a lot of anti-racism, implicit bias, equity work, and I find that it's so varied in different places. So I would suggest that my initial chess move, if you will, is to determine the needs of the client and determine if I can support that and how I can support it. I'll be very frank and tell you that in a couple of instances, I've gleaned that they need something that is not in my wheelhouse, where I might refer them to someone else. Or frankly, Richard, something they need something that I'm not interested in providing, or it's not something that I don't enjoy, back to my earlier point. So that will sometimes help me make a decision as to whether or not we'll partner in the long run.
Yeah, I do want to get to your DEI work in a moment, but I want to stick to this point of the school quality reviews and equity audits. So we've heard of them. A lot of people have done them, varying degrees of effectiveness. I would argue. And some,
Yes.
some of these school quality reviews we've seen have been performative in some aspects. Some of it
Ooh, well said.
incredibly impactful in others, and some of it has been adapted for various reasons and sometimes lost the essence of why they exist. And so, what methods or approaches have you found or do you recommend in identifying and addressing actual key areas for improvement within schools?
So that one is deep too, and I would say that it's unique to each school, if you will. And to your earlier point, let me just note very key points you made about some of the school quality reviews. Oftentimes they are very performative. As a trained lead reviewer who's done them throughout the country, I could go, pull my soapbox out and do a lecture on how we're trained actually to kind of see through some of the performative pieces.
Right, right.
Beyond that, I would say that I work with colleagues who have great expertise in the area, and then we're grounded by a rubric. And then what I've had to train myself in is actually triangulating the evidence so that, one comment in a focus group or one great classroom or one horrible classroom does not sway the entire report. So I could go into those details. But to your it kind of connects to my second point. After having determined what are the areas of challenge for a specific school or organization, we tried to examine specific supports that can help you and kind of using the resources that you have on site. So a quick snapshot is I just did a full district-wide school quality review in a district that will go nameless right here in New Jersey, and there's 7 schools there. One of the leaders just felt exhausted. I don't have enough support. This is a smaller school, and she was kind of lamenting over not having a vice principal.
Mhm.
Um, her numbers were so low, in my opinion, under 250 kids, and this was already in March. I did not foresee the district searching for hiring and providing her with an assistant principal. So for her uniquely, we went into what resources do we have here on site? What lead teachers, instructional coaches, what people do we have within the building to support you where we can build that network within the school of instructional supports where A, you won't feel so abandoned, B, you won't feel so overwhelmed, and C, you won't be kind of waiting for Superman, like the district's going to send me someone. And we landed on what can you do without that district support. So those responses vary, based on the individual needs of the school. Sometimes it is the district being, it mirrors the district work. So as much as it points down, if you will, at the school, it equally points up at the district and the resources that they're receiving or not receiving. So again, unique to each school as to the supports.
Yeah. I mean, a common theme that's come emerging is the need to personalize, right, the experience for each engagement that you find yourself in.
Correct. And I actually find joy in that. I have found other colleagues who have given me the advice, like, Chris, you need to box these things, you need to cook up and copyright like 10 different PowerPoints and then train other people to go out and do them. And that may be on my vision board, but there's a piece to me that really does enjoy crafting the unique supports for each client,
Yeah.
if you will.
Absolutely. I promise to get back to this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We know they're vital to today's educational landscape. They've always been, right? But I think in recent years, it's come more to the forefront as being a moral imperative, I would argue.
Yes.
You offer some practical advice for leaders looking to embed these values more concretely and authentically into their institutions.
That's a great one because I will go ahead and suggest that as an educator, every probably 3 or 4 years, there's the new buzzword that becomes the wave, right? And I remember culturally responsive teaching and learning, and when social emotional learning was at the top of the pyramid, if you will. And over the past few years, it's been this enhancing equity in those equity reviews. I'm now dipping my toe into this water of psychological safety, which is a new, hot one. But I will share for leaders, this is something that's really interesting. If you want to really engage in this work, particularly the equity work, it requires leaders to do a great deal of reflection. And I'm now, having done this work a few times, I'm starting to see specific trends. So, number one, they reach out and want this equity work. And I have to discern early on, is this because they need to check this off on their box? Have they been told you have to have some equity work in your pieces, right? Or are they really invested in the work? That's
Right.
the first stage. Second stage, without fail, Richard, even those who are really invested, I feel like when I opened them up to what this work could mean, short term and long term, they hit a point where they're almost like, what did I get myself into? Like, why did I decide to open this box to talk about race and culture and socioeconomic pieces? Many organizations, as evidenced by the fact that we haven't done this work before, they tend to push that under the rug or kick it down the road or not open that Pandora's box. I worked with a school in the Bronx a couple of years ago. This one is always pivotal for me. These people had been working together. The least senior member had been there 9 years.
Wow.
And a woman who had worked there for 12 years pulled me over after the session and said, I've been here for 12 years and we've never talked about race or ethnicity or culture. And this is in the South Bronx, where like the lion's share of the teachers were white and the overwhelming number of students were black and brown, but you've never mentioned race. You've never thought about how that impacts the work. And I think people feel safer not digging into this work. Anyway, I've been accused of arguably scaring people away from the work, right? Because I know that it can lead hopefully to big systematic structural change. That's where I see it happening. It's
Yeah.
not when you're in the room and you realize, oh, there's 90% of us are white men in here. Like, how did that happen? The change isn't just that awakening. The
Mhm.
change is when we then revisit our hiring policies and adjust them in order to see the systematic racism that created this space.
Yeah.
So I said a mouthful there, but I would say that the salient point of advice for leaders would be ready to get to really reflect and to there are going to be some speed bumps along this road. I haven't seen the organization after 10 sessions get to like utopia equity island, right, where everyone is singing kumbaya and kind of floating around the room. It doesn't traditionally happen in that way.
Yeah. And, at the risk of being controversial, you don't get to educate Black and Brown children without engaging in the work. Like you
Let's
can't,
go.
you
Let's
can't
go.
choose the areas that you feel comfortable in and not feel comfortable in and expect to be fulfilling your mission, vision, and values. You can't, it's not a la carte, right?
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. I can go down that route, but I won't.
Okay.
Looking ahead, so look, there are plenty of people who are now leaving the traditional brick and mortar schools, running school systems themselves, and are looking to or have developed a brand of themselves, if you will. And whether you are a curriculum developer or still in the interest of supporting schools, how should we collectively be preparing ourselves for the future of education?
Mm. Well, mine, I'm going to really be reflective for a minute and be vulnerable even and tell you that mine started again with this eternal internal kind of understanding of this work, right? My mother and father, God bless them, passed away. They both lived to 91 years old, but they were both from very rural Kentucky. Well, my mother's from Louisville, Kentucky, and my father is from Beaver Dam, Kentucky, which is, a very rural space.
Yeah.
But I remember, and this is as early as 5 years ago. I had to, I was trained and raised in their mindset. They wanted to keep me very safe and very non-controversial. And I feel that, in reflection, I know it was born out of my mother to keep wanting to keep me safe. But her message to me was ultimately like, be small.
Mhm.
Don't ruffle anybody's feathers. Go get a job. Go work for someone. I remember when I left my principalship to join Cambridge, she couldn't fathom, like, what does a consultant do? Like, where's your office? Where's your school? What do you do? And I'm quietly like, Mom, I got a $22,000 raise. I'm traveling the country. I'm working from home. Like, she couldn't fathom that. It didn't exist when she was a child. So I
Sure.
would suggest, first of all, and I'm speaking for me, maybe many people are way past that phase. But for me, it was seeing my space and recognizing that, yes, I'm worthy and I can start a company and I can work outside of the box. And I find great joy now in speaking with principals and not having to give them like the company line, right? Where the district says XYZ, I could come in and say BQD, right? I can just give you my best practices, my resources, and is a freeing feeling of not having to be like, well, if you turn to the protocol of the district on page 11, it says you should do this, right? I love the freedom that I've worked around the country and I can galvanize the best of what I've collected and share that very openly and honestly with people. That might be, as I'm saying it out loud, Richard, one of my favorite parts about it is that I'm not bound by what I used to feel was my school or my district or my state or, the academic tests that our kids had to have to take.
Yeah.
So I would say on the joyful side, there's a freeing part of it, and you can pursue your goals and your your own personal benchmarks in a stronger way. On the glass half empty side, I would just say be ready for those feelings of, the very practical, like, I don't get a check every 2 weeks, right? Like, I have to wait for these invoices to be sent. I mean, some of those granular things in starting your own business or pursuing something outside of the box, try to be prepared for those pieces as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, I appreciate you sharing, as you mentioned, the exercise you do with your daughter is even just what brings you joy, right? It's very clear, right, that this work does bring you immense joy, and it's evident in how you speak about it and how you set yourself up in order to continue doing the things that do bring you joy, but also the practical nature of this isn't pretty, right? Running school systems isn't pretty, being a teacher isn't pretty,
Goodness.
running an organization
Yes.
isn't pretty, and you have to kind of be okay with accepting both ends of that, both sides of that coin in order to be successful. But what I'm taking from this conversation though is it's okay to take up space, right? And I think that when people are trying to either navigate the terrain of running excellent programs, navigate the terrain of evaluating whether or not those programs are in fact excellent, and then navigating how you should be operating within that space can be very, very challenging. And
Yes, sir.
what you shared around your mom saying, or insinuating kind of be small, we do that to ourselves a lot,
We sure
particularly
do.
Black and brown leaders. And I'm heartened, encouraged, inspired, all of the things by the wisdom that you shared today. And I am confident that folks watching this will also feel the same. So thank you very much for your time today, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.